The silence hit first, sharper than any blade. Carenza felt it slice through the ballroom like a winter wind, the music faltering, conversations dying mid-syllable, every rustling gown and clinking glass suddenly, dreadfully still. She stood in the center of the Ashford ballroom with 500 eyes fixed upon her, and the man before her looked at her as though she were something scraped from the bottom of his boot. "I asked you a question." His voice carried across the marble floors with the cold authority of someone who had never been denied anything in his life. Tall, dark-haired, with a face that would have been beautiful if not for the contempt twisting his features. "Who permitted you entry to this event?" Carenza's throat constricted. Her invitation was genuine. Lady Ashford herself had extended it through a mutual acquaintance, a kindness Carenza had barely believed when the letter arrived at their cramped lodgings 3 days prior. She had borrowed the gown from her landlady's daughter, spent hours pinning her auburn hair into something resembling fashionable, walked 2 miles in shoes that pinched because they couldn't afford a hackney cab. And now this. "I have an invitation," she managed, her voice steadier than her trembling hands. She reached for her reticule, but the man's gesture stopped her. "I'm certain you do. Forged, purchased, or stolen. The Fairclough family has not received a legitimate society invitation in 3 years, not since your father's disgrace became public knowledge." The whispers erupted like flames, catching dry kindling. Fairclough. The name spread through the crowd with poisonous speed. Carenza heard fragments. The forger, academic fraud, ruined 3 institutions. Shameless. None of it was true. Her father had been framed by a jealous colleague, but the accusations had destroyed him before he could prove his innocence. He died 6 months later, broken and bitter, and her family had been paying for his supposed sins ever since. "My father was innocent." The words came out before she could stop them. "He was never convicted of anything." "Absence of conviction is not the same as innocence, Miss Fairclough." The man's blue eyes were frozen and fathomless. "Your presence here is an insult to every respectable family in attendance. I must ask you to leave before you embarrass yourself further." Heat flooded Carenza's face, not just embarrassment now, but anger. Pure, blazing anger at the injustice of it all, at a society that condemned the innocent and rewarded the cruel, at this arrogant stranger who presumed to judge her father, her family, her very right to exist in the same room as his precious aristocracy. "And who are you," she said, her chin lifting, "to make such demands? This is Lady Ashford's home, not yours." The gasp that rippled through the crowd told her she'd made a terrible mistake. The man's expression flickered. Something that might have been surprise, quickly suppressed. "I am Caius Blackwell, Duke of Aldworth. Lady Ashford is my aunt. And you, Miss Fairclough, are trespassing on her hospitality." Duke. The word crashed through her awareness like a physical blow. She hadn't just challenged some pompous baron or self-important viscount. She had publicly defied a duke in his aunt's home, while wearing a borrowed dress and shoes that didn't fit. Her mother would faint when she heard. Her brother Merrick would probably laugh, which was almost worse. "I see." Carenza's voice sounded distant to her own ears. "Then I suppose I should apologize for the inconvenience of my existence. Your Grace." The sarcasm slipped out unbidden, a defense mechanism she'd developed over 3 years of social exile. She regretted it instantly. Or she should have regretted it. Instead, she felt a grim satisfaction at the way his jaw tightened. "Remove her," the Duke said to someone behind her. 2 footmen materialized at her elbows, their grips firm but not cruel. The crowd parted like the Red Sea, creating a corridor of shame toward the ballroom doors. Carenza could see every face, The matrons with their judgmental fans, the young ladies with their horrified fascination, the gentlemen with their cold indifference, or worse, their amusement. This was it. The complete and public destruction of whatever shred of reputation she had left. Tomorrow, every drawing room in London would buzz with the story of the Fairclough girl who dared to attend the Ashford ball and was thrown out by the Duke of Aldworth himself. She had almost reached the doors when a new voice cut through the silence. "Caius, what on earth is happening here?" Lady Ashford descended the main staircase with the measured elegance of a woman who had been hosting society events for 40 years, silver-haired, keen-eyed, draped in amethyst silk that matched the legendary Ashford jewels at her throat. "Aunt Philippa," the Duke's tone shifted, still cold but tempered with respect. "I was merely removing an uninvited guest." "Uninvited?" Lady Ashford's eyebrow arched with devastating precision. "That young woman is Miss Carenza Fairclough. I invited her myself. She is the daughter of my late husband's dearest friend, and she is most certainly welcome in my home." The silence that followed was different, charged with something new. Shock, confusion, the delicious anticipation of scandal that society craved like opium. The Duke's face might have been carved from marble. "I was not informed. Clearly not. Though I confess, nephew, I expected better judgment from you than to publicly humiliate a guest without first confirming the facts." Lady Ashford reached Carenza and took her hand with surprising warmth. "My dear girl, I am mortified. Please accept my deepest apologies for this spectacle." Carenza didn't know what to say. She stood frozen between the footmen who had released her, her borrowed gown suddenly feeling less like a disguise and more like armor. "The apology should not come from you, Lady Ashford." The Duke's voice was strained now, the first crack in his glacial composure. "It should come from me." Every eye in the ballroom fixed on him, Carenza included. She watched something shift behind his cold blue gaze. Calculation. Decision. "Miss Fairclough." He stepped toward her, and the crowd held its collective breath. "I have wronged you grievously. I made assumptions based on rumor and prejudice, and I compounded that error by acting publicly rather than discreetly. I offer you my sincerest apologies." The words were correct, formal, exactly what protocol demanded. But his eyes held hers with an intensity that suggested something more complex, brewing beneath the surface. "Pretty words," Carenza heard herself say. "But words are cheap, Your Grace. My father learned that lesson well." Another ripple of shock through the crowd. One did not speak to a duke in such a manner. One certainly did not throw his apology back in his face before 500 witnesses. But the Duke did not look angry. If anything, the ghost of something unexpected crossed his features. Interest, perhaps. Or recognition. "You're right," he said quietly, so only she could hear. "Words are cheap. Perhaps actions would speak more clearly." Before Carenza could respond, he turned to face the ballroom with the commanding presence of a man born to lead armies. "Ladies and gentlemen, I owe this gathering more than an apology. I owe you an explanation." His voice carried effortlessly across the space. Miss Fairclough's father, the late Professor Fairclough, was a brilliant scholar whose reputation was destroyed by false accusations. My aunt asked me to investigate the matter some months ago, and I have recently concluded my inquiry. I am now convinced of his complete innocence. The true culprit has been identified and will face consequences. Carenza's heart stopped. What was he saying? She had spent 3 years trying to clear her father's name, had written letters, petitioned institutions, begged anyone who would listen, and now this stranger, this arrogant duke who had tried to throw her out 5 minutes ago, was publicly declaring her father's innocence. Furthermore, the Duke continued, I believe society has treated the Fairclough family with shameful injustice. Miss Fairclough deserves not our scorn, but our admiration for enduring such treatment, with grace and dignity. Grace and dignity. She had called him out in front of everyone. She had been anything but graceful. As a gesture of my sincerity, I would ask Miss Fairclough to honor me with the first dance. The orchestra, bless them, began a waltz without waiting for instruction. Lady Ashford squeezed Carence's hand once and released her, and the Duke of Aldworth stood before her with his hand extended, waiting. Carence's mind raced. This made no sense. 5 minutes ago he had wanted her gone. Now he was publicly championing her cause and asking her to dance? There had to be an angle, a scheme, something she wasn't seeing. But the entire ballroom was watching. If she refused, she would look petty and ungrateful. If she accepted, she would be stepping into something she didn't understand, with a man she didn't trust. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered, as she placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and firm as he led her to the floor. "Because you didn't cower. Everyone else would have fled in tears. You stood there and fought back. That's not an answer. It's the only one I'm prepared to give at the moment." They began to dance. Carence had learned the steps years ago, before the fall, when her family still attended society events as welcomed guests. The muscle memory returned, though her body felt stiff and uncertain in his arms. "You're holding your breath," he observed. "You're holding me hostage." That surprised a short laugh from him, quickly suppressed. An interesting interpretation of a dance. Is there another interpretation? She met his eyes directly, refusing to be intimidated. "You publicly humiliate me, then publicly rescue me, all in the space of 10 minutes. Either you're unstable, or you want something." The Duke's expression shifted again, that same calculating look she'd seen before. "What I want, Miss Fairclough, is complicated. Simplify it." They turned together, her skirt sweeping across the marble floor. Around them, other couples had joined the dance, but Carenza felt their curious gazes like physical pressure. "My grandmother," the Duke said carefully, "has certain expectations regarding my marriage. I have been avoiding those expectations for 2 years. My avoidance has become increasingly difficult to maintain." "You want a shield," Carenza realized. "Someone to distract from whoever she's actually trying to make you marry." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's one way to phrase it. What's another way?" "A mutually beneficial arrangement between two people who find themselves trapped by society's expectations." The waltz brought them closer, then swept them apart. Carence's mind worked furiously. He was proposing a scheme, a fake courtship, or something similar, using her family's disgrace as a distraction from his own problems. And what would I gain from this arrangement? Restoration of your family's reputation. I wasn't lying about the evidence I've uncovered. Your father was framed. I can prove it. But proving it quietly would take months, perhaps years. Proving it publicly, with my name attached to the cause, would take weeks. Her heart clenched painfully. 3 years. 3 years of fighting alone, of doors slammed in her face, of her mother taking in mending, and her brother chasing desperate schemes. And this man claimed he could fix it in weeks? Why would you do that? What's in it for you beyond a convenient distraction? The music swelled toward its conclusion. The Duke's hand pressed more firmly against her waist, guiding her through the final turns. "Because," he said quietly, "I recognize a fellow prisoner when I see one. We're both trapped, Miss Fairclough. Perhaps we can help each other escape." The waltz ended. They stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by hundreds of watching eyes. Caius stepped back, and to Carence's shock, something almost like respect crossed his features. "My sister Tanith will find you shortly. She'll explain the details I cannot discuss here. After that, the choice is yours." He bowed, turned, and vanished into the crowd, leaving Carenza alone in the center of the ballroom, with 500 questions and no answers. She didn't have to wait long. A young woman appeared at her elbow with the sudden grace of a summer storm, dark hair like her brother's, but with warm brown eyes that held none of his Arctic distance. She wore dove-gray silk and a smile that seemed genuinely delighted. "Miss Fairclough, you were magnificent." She grabbed Carenza's hands with startling familiarity. "I've never seen anyone speak to Caius like that. He's been insufferable for years, and you just called him out in front of everyone. It was glorious." I was terrified. "You didn't look terrified. You looked like a queen." The young woman squeezed her hands. "I'm Tanith, Caius's sister. We need to talk somewhere private before Lady Venetia spots us." "Lady Venetia?" Tanith's expression darkened slightly. "The woman my grandmother has decided Caius should marry. Blonde, beautiful, utterly venomous. She's been circling him like a shark all season, and grandmother keeps arranging intimate dinners that somehow always include her." She tugged Carenza toward a side door. "Come, I'll explain everything." They slipped through the door into a quiet gallery lined with portraits of stern-faced Ashford ancestors. Tanith checked the corridor both ways before speaking. "My brother is in trouble," she said without preamble. "Our grandmother controls a significant portion of the family fortune, separate from the ducal holdings. She's added a condition to her will. If Caius isn't officially betrothed by the end of the season, her entire fortune passes to our cousin, Declan, instead." "That seems extreme." "Grandmother is extreme. She's been trying to get Caius married for 3 years, ever since his fiancée jilted him for his best friend at their engagement ball." Carenza's eyebrows rose. "That's humiliating? Devastating? The worst scandal in a decade?" Tanith nodded. "All of those." Caius retreated completely afterward. He attends events when duty requires, but refuses any hint of courtship. Grandmother lost patience last month and changed her will. Now he has 6 weeks to find a fiancée, or he loses everything she controls. So he needs a fake betrothal. He needs someone society would believe he might actually choose, someone unexpected, someone who isn't Lady Venetia. Tanith's eyes sparkled. Someone who publicly defied him and made him look like an ass in front of 500 people. Carenza laughed despite herself. "You're saying my humiliation was actually an audition? I'm saying fate has a sense of humor. Caius was planning to leave early tonight. He's been dodging grandmother's dinner invitations all week. Then you happened, and suddenly he sees a solution. I'm not a solution. I'm a disgraced scholar's daughter with no fortune and a borrowed dress. You're perfect." Tanith's eyes were fierce. "No one would believe Caius chose you for conventional reasons. It would have to be something else. Something romantic. Something that makes sense only to the heart and not the head. Like a whirlwind courtship sparked by a dramatic public confrontation?" "Exactly." Carenza pulled away, pacing the narrow gallery. Her mind churned through the implications. A fake betrothal to a duke. Her father's name cleared. Her family's reputation restored. In exchange for what? A few weeks of play acting? Attending events on a duke's arm? Pretending to be falling in love with a man made of ice? "What happens when it ends?" she asked. "When his 6 weeks are up and he's satisfied the terms of the will?" "You'll be released from the engagement quietly. Something about incompatibility or mutual agreement. By then, your family's reputation will be restored. You'll have connections, references. Caius will ensure you're positioned for a real match if you want one, or a respectable independence if you don't." It sounded too good, too convenient, too much like the kind of scheme that destroyed her father. And Lady Venetia, his grandmother, they'll just accept this? Tanith's expression grew serious. Lady Venetia will fight. She's wanted the Aldworth title since she was 15, and she doesn't lose gracefully. But Caius is the Duke. His choice is his choice. As for grandmother, she'll rage initially, but she loves him. If she believes this is real, she'll come around. If she believes it's real. Carenza stopped pacing. That's the problem, isn't it? We'd have to convince everyone, including a woman who's known your brother his entire life. Yes. Tanith didn't flinch from the truth. It would require commitment, appearances at every major event, private moments that become public knowledge, perhaps even genuine affection, or at least the appearance of it. Carenza thought of her mother's tired face, of Merrick's increasingly desperate schemes, of the cramped lodgings and the endless calculations of how to make pennies stretch. She thought of her father dying in disgrace when he deserved honor. And she thought of the Duke of Aldworth, cold and cutting, looking at her with something that might have been recognition. "I want conditions," she said. Tanith's smile widened. "Of course you do. Caius said you would. He said you had spine." "He said that? Among other things?" Tanith produced a small card from her reticule. "Write to him tomorrow. Name your conditions. He'll agree to any reasonable terms." "How do you know?" "Because he needs you more than you need him, Miss Fairclough. That's leverage. Use it." A door opened somewhere nearby. Voices echoed down the corridor. Tanith pressed the card into Carenza's hand and gestured toward a different exit. "Go back to the ballroom through that door. Find Lady Ashford. Stay close to her for the rest of the evening. Caius will keep his distance now. Let society speculate about what just happened. Tomorrow, everything begins." Carenza looked at the card. A simple address in elegant script. Aldworth House, Mayfair. "I haven't agreed yet." "No," Tanith said softly. "But you will, because you're not the kind of woman who walks away from a fight. And this, Miss Fairclough, is a fight worth winning." She vanished through the side door, leaving Carenza alone with the weight of the card and the portraits of dead aristocrats watching from the walls. The letter arrived at her lodgings at precisely 10 o'clock the following morning, carried by a liveried footman who looked comically out of place in their shabby street. Carenza's mother had paled at the sight of the Aldworth crest on the seal. Merrick had nearly choked on his breakfast. Now Carenza sat in the cramped parlor, reading the Duke's words for the 4th time. "Miss Fairclough, I understand you have conditions. I am prepared to hear them. My carriage will call for you at 2 o'clock. My sister will accompany us as chaperone. We will discuss terms as equals. Aldworth. Short. Direct. No apologies. No flattery. No pretense." She appreciated that, at least. At 2 o'clock precisely, a gleaming black carriage bearing the ducal crest stopped before their door. Tanith emerged first, dressed in cheerful yellow, her smile bright enough to illuminate the dingy street. The Duke followed, severe in dark blue, his expression giving nothing away. Carenza had worn her second best dress, the one with the mended hem that didn't show if she held her skirts carefully. She refused to borrow again. If she was negotiating her future, she would do it as herself. The carriage was private, luxurious, and completely silent until Tanith broke the tension. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Caius, say something. You're making the poor girl think you're planning to murder her." "I was waiting for Miss Fairclough to begin." Carenza met his eyes directly. "Very well. 3 conditions. First, my mother is to receive a written statement of my father's innocence, signed by you and by the actual perpetrator, within 1 week. She has suffered enough without proof to show the neighbors." Done. The speed of his agreement startled her. "You haven't heard the other conditions." "I said your terms would be met if they were reasonable. That one is more than reasonable. Continue. Carenza steadied herself. Second, when this arrangement ends, I want letters of introduction to 3 respectable households seeking a governess or companion. I won't go back to scrambling for position without credentials. Something shifted in his expression, something almost like respect. You could ask for money. I'm asking for independence. There's a difference. He nodded slowly. Done. And your third condition. This was the one that mattered, the one she'd stayed awake all night considering. If, during this arrangement, you meet someone you actually wish to marry, you'll tell me immediately. I won't be used as a shield while you conduct a real courtship in secret. I won't be made a fool twice in one lifetime. The silence stretched between them, taut and testing. Tanith watched her brother with barely concealed curiosity. You're protecting yourself, the Duke said finally. From what happened to your father? From being the last to know when the scheme falls apart. Yes, that's wise. He extended his hand across the carriage. You have my word. All 3 conditions. If I ever intend to end this arrangement for any reason, you will be the first to know. Not the last. Carenza looked at his outstretched hand, elegant, powerful, attached to a man she barely knew and certainly didn't trust. But trust could be built, and she had been powerless for 3 years. This was a chance to be something else. She took his hand. His grip was firm and warm, sealing a bargain that would change everything. Then we have an agreement, she said. We have an agreement. He released her hand, but held her gaze. Welcome to the performance of your life, Miss Fairclough. I hope you're a quick study. Tanith clapped her hands with delight. Oh, this is going to be wonderful. We have so much to plan. First, we need to establish the narrative. Love at first argument? Fascination born from conflict? The Duke, who was enchanted by the only woman brave enough to challenge him. Tanith, the Duke's voice carried a warning. What? It's not entirely fiction, is it? You were intrigued. I watched your face when she called you out. You looked more alive than you have in years. Carenza watched the Duke's jaw tighten, watched him choose not to respond to his sister's observation. And she wondered, for the first time, if this arrangement might be more complicated than either of them intended. Aldworth House rose before the carriage like a monument to everything Carenza had lost. Cream-colored stone, columns that stretched toward the gray London sky, windows that caught the afternoon light and threw it back in golden sheets. The iron gates bore the Blackwell crest, a raven clutching a sword, and they swung open at the carriage's approach as if the house itself recognized its master. Carenza pressed her hands flat against her borrowed skirts to keep them from trembling. Breathe, Tanith murmured beside her. It's just a house. It's a palace. It is home. Tanith squeezed her arm. And for the next several weeks, it's your home too. Try to look like you belong. The carriage stopped. A footman materialized to open the door. Caius descended first, then turned to offer his hand. Carenza took it, hyper-aware of the strength in his grip, the casual authority with which he commanded the steps, the staff, and the very air around him. Inside was worse. Or better. She couldn't decide. Marble floors veined with gold stretched toward a grand staircase that curved upward like a lover's embrace. Crystal chandeliers dripped light from ceilings, painted with scenes from mythology. Portraits lined the walls, generations of Blackwells watching with aristocratic judgment as the disgraced scholar's daughter walked among them. The Blue Suite, Caius said to the housekeeper, a stern woman in black bombazine who appeared from nowhere. Have it prepared immediately. Miss Fairclough will require a lady's maid as well. Of course, Your Grace. The housekeeper's eyes flickered to Carenza with curiosity, but no judgment. Shall I send Una? She's quite capable with hair and dress. Perfect. Tanith linked her arm through Carence's before anyone could object. I'll show her the house while the room is prepared. Come along. You need to see the library. She tugged Carence away from the entrance hall, through a succession of rooms that blurred together in a haze of silk wallpaper and priceless furniture. A morning room in shades of rose. A music room with a pianoforte that probably cost more than Carence's entire childhood home. A small parlor, a large parlor, a gallery filled with art she recognized from books but never imagined seeing in person. And then the library. Carence stopped in the doorway, her breath catching. 2 stories of books rose around her, leather spines in every color, ladders on brass rails, windows that flooded the space with light. The smell hit her like a physical memory. Paper and dust and knowledge. Her father's smell. The smell of home before home had become a cramped set of rooms where they rationed candles. You love books, Tanith observed. My father was a scholar. Carence moved forward, as if drawn by invisible strings, her fingers trailing along the nearest shelf. He taught me to read Latin before I learned English. He said books were the only democracy, that anyone could enter their world regardless of birth. He sounds wonderful. He was. She pulled down a volume at random. Aristotle's Ethics in the original Greek, her father's favorite. He didn't deserve what happened to him. No. Tanith's voice was soft. And neither did you. They stood in comfortable silence until a maid appeared, a young woman with copper hair and a scattering of freckles across her nose. Miss Fairclough, I'm Una. Your room is ready. I thought you might want to rest before dinner. Rest. As if Carence could possibly rest in this house of wonders and terrors. But she let Una lead her through more corridors, up a different staircase, to a suite of rooms that made her want to weep. The blue suite. Walls papered in soft cerulean, a bed canopied in darker sapphire silk, windows overlooking gardens that stretched toward distant trees. A writing desk, a dressing table, a fireplace where flames already crackled. Her small bag of possessions sat on a bench, looking shabby and lost. It's beautiful, she managed. It's one of the smaller guest rooms. Una began unpacking with cheerful efficiency. But it has the best view of the sunrise. Lady Tanith thought you'd appreciate that. Small. This was small. Carence thought of her room at home, barely large enough for a narrow bed and a washstand. Thought of her mother sleeping in what had once been a storage closet, so Merrick could have the second bedroom. There's a bath drawn, Una continued, and Lady Tanith sent up some dresses for you to borrow until yours arrive. The modiste is coming tomorrow. His Grace insisted on an entire wardrobe. An entire wardrobe. For a pretend courtship that would end in weeks. It was excessive, generous, confusing. Una, Carence caught the maid's arm. Why are you all being so kind? You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Una's expression softened with something that looked almost like understanding. Begging your pardon, miss, but this house has been sad for a long time. His Grace works constantly. Lady Tanith tries to brighten things, but she can't do it alone. And the Dowager, she means well, but she's so focused on duty that she forgets about happiness. She smoothed the bed covers carefully. You're the first thing that's happened in years that feels like change. We're hoping you might be good for him. Good for him. The Duke of Aldworth, who looked at her with calculation and spoke with cold precision. The man who had humiliated her publicly before rescuing her just as publicly. She couldn't imagine being good for him. She could barely imagine surviving the next few weeks. But she let Una draw her a bath, let herself sink into warm water scented with lavender, let herself pretend, just for a moment, that she belonged. Later, Wrapped in a dressing gown softer than anything she'd ever owned, she sat at the window and watched the last light fade from the garden. Somewhere in this vast house, a duke was planning her future. Somewhere, a dowager was sharpening her claws. And somewhere, her mother was probably worrying herself sick over where her daughter had disappeared to. She should write home. She should explain everything. But how did one explain something like this? Dear Mother, I've agreed to pretend to be courted by a duke in exchange for clearing Father's name. Please don't worry. I'll be fine. Fine. As if anything about this situation could be described as fine. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Una appeared with a tray of tea and small sandwiches. Lady Tanith thought you might be hungry, miss, and she asked me to tell you that dinner is at 8, but you're welcome to take it in your rooms if you'd prefer. Carenza considered the offer. Hiding in her beautiful cage seemed appealing, but hiding wouldn't teach her how to navigate this world she'd stumbled into. I'll come down for dinner, she said. Thank you, Una. The maid smiled, something like approval in her eyes. Very good, miss. I'll lay out a dress for you. Something simple but elegant. First impressions matter. First impressions. Carenza had already made hers, sleeping on a borrowed dress and sarcasm. Whatever came next couldn't possibly be worse. Tomorrow, she would face the dowager. Tomorrow, the real performance would begin. Tonight, she would simply breathe. The Dowager Duchess of Aldworth did not descend staircases. She manifested, appearing in the morning room at precisely 11 o'clock, as if she had always been there, and the rest of the world had simply failed to notice. She was smaller than Carenza expected, silver-haired, severe-featured, dressed in unrelenting black that somehow looked more elegant than any ball gown. Her eyes were the same frozen blue as her grandson's, but where his coldness felt like armor, hers felt like weaponry. So, the single syllable cracked through the room like a whip. This is the Fairclough girl. Carenza rose from her seat and curtsied with the careful precision her mother had drilled into her years ago. Your Grace, thank you for allowing me to stay in your beautiful home. It's not my home. It belongs to my grandson. I merely occupy rooms in the east wing out of his sufferance. The dowager's gaze swept over Carenza from head to foot, missing nothing. The dress is acceptable. The posture is adequate. The accent is better than I expected. Who educated you? My father, Your Grace, and my mother, who was a gentleman's daughter before her marriage. The dowager settled into a chair without invitation and gestured for Carenza to sit. And now your father is dead. Your family is ruined, and you've somehow convinced my grandson to champion your cause. Impressive, considering you met him less than 24 hours ago. There was no point in pretense. The dowager clearly knew everything already. I convinced him of nothing, Your Grace. He made his own decision. Did he? One silver eyebrow arched. Caius makes very few decisions that don't serve his interests. What interest do you serve, Miss Fairclough? Carenza met her gaze directly. I believe you already know the answer to that question. The silence stretched between them like a blade being tested. Then, unexpectedly, the dowager laughed. Tanith said you had spine. I see she wasn't exaggerating. She leaned forward slightly. Very well. Let us speak plainly. My grandson requires a distraction from Lady Venetia Harcourt, whom I have been attempting to match him with for 2 years. You have agreed to provide that distraction. In exchange, he will clear your father's name and restore your family to respectability. That is the arrangement, Your Grace. And do you expect anything else from this arrangement? Marriage, perhaps? A title? The question was a trap, but Carenza had been navigating traps for 3 years. I expect nothing that hasn't been explicitly agreed upon. Your grandson has been clear about the temporary nature of our association. When it ends, I will leave with references and connections, nothing more." Pretty words. The dowager's eyes narrowed. But words are easily spoken. Let me tell you what I see, Miss Fairclough. I see a clever young woman with nothing to lose and everything to gain. I see someone who has survived disgrace and poverty through wit and determination. Those are admirable qualities. They are also dangerous ones. Dangerous to whom? To my grandson. The dowager's voice dropped, losing some of its cutting edge. Caius was engaged 3 years ago to a young woman named Seraphine Vance. Beautiful, accomplished, from an excellent family. He loved her desperately, foolishly, with the blind passion of a young man who had never been denied anything. She jilted him at their engagement ball, walked into the room on the arm of his closest friend, and announced that she'd made a mistake, that she was marrying Hadrian instead. Carenza remembered Tanith mentioning this, but hearing the details made it worse. She could imagine it. The crowded ballroom, the whispers, the public destruction of a man who had never known vulnerability. He hasn't been the same since, the dowager continued. He works constantly. He attends events with perfect correctness but no warmth. He's built barriers so high that even Tanith can barely reach him anymore. She fixed Carenza with a piercing stare. I don't want Lady Venetia because I think she would make him happy. I want her because I think she would make him functional. She's cold enough to match his coldness. Their marriage would be a partnership, not a passion. He wouldn't risk anything with her because there would be nothing to risk. And you think I'm different? I think you're the first person in 3 years who has made him react instead of perform. I watched him at the Ashford ball. When you challenged him, something woke up behind his eyes. Whether that's good or bad, I cannot say. But it's dangerous either way. The clock on the mantel ticked into the silence. Outside, a bird called from the garden. Carenza chose her next words with care. I have no intention of making your grandson feel anything, Your Grace. This is a business arrangement. When it ends, I will leave, and he will marry whoever he chooses. Lady Venetia, or someone else entirely. It makes no difference to me. Doesn't it? The dowager smiled, but it wasn't a kind smile. We shall see. You're a survivor, Miss Fairclough. Survivors adapt. They become whatever their circumstances require. Right now, your circumstances require you to pretend affection for a man who could change your entire life with a word. She rose, signaling the end of the interview. Just remember, when you find yourself actually feeling what you're pretending to feel, that I warned you. She swept from the room, leaving Carenza alone with the echo of her words and the unsettling suspicion that the dowager saw far more than she revealed. For a long moment, Carenza simply sat there, processing what had just occurred. The dowager had done more than warn her. She had given her information, context, weapons. Why would a woman who clearly disapproved of this arrangement arm her potential enemy with knowledge? Unless the dowager wasn't entirely opposed. Unless, somewhere beneath that icy exterior, she hoped Carenza might succeed where Lady Venetia would fail. Not in trapping her grandson into marriage, but in waking him up, in making him feel something real. It was a dangerous hope for everyone involved. Carenza rose slowly, smoothing her borrowed dress, and went to find Tanith. She had questions, and the younger Blackwell sister seemed the only one willing to give honest answers. He found her in the library that evening, as she had hoped he would. The sun had set an hour ago, painting the windows amber before fading to indigo. Carenza had lit a single lamp at the reading desk, unwilling to summon servants for something so simple, and had lost herself in a volume of Catullus that reminded her painfully of her father. You met my grandmother." She looked up to find Caius standing in the doorway, still dressed in the formal clothes he'd worn to whatever parliamentary session had occupied his afternoon. His cravat was loosened slightly, the first imperfection she'd seen in his appearance. "She's terrifying. She's protective." He moved into the room, and she noticed the weariness in his shoulders, the slight drag in his usually precise steps. "She warned you away from me, I assume." "In a manner of speaking." Carenza closed her book carefully. "She told me about Seraphine Vance." The name landed like a stone in still water. Caius stopped moving, his face going carefully blank. "Did she?" "She wanted me to understand what I was dealing with. A man who builds barriers, who works constantly to avoid feeling, who might wake up when challenged, but retreats immediately afterward." Carenza met his eyes. Was she right? The silence stretched between them, but it felt different than the dowager's pointed silences. This was something rawer, more uncertain. "My grandmother," Caius said finally, "understands facts. She doesn't understand context." He moved to the shelf nearest her, pulling down a volume apparently at random. "Seraphine didn't just jilt me. She explained, in front of 300 guests, exactly why I was unsuitable. Too cold," she said. "Too controlled, incapable of genuine emotion. She said marrying me would be like marrying a beautifully carved statue." Carenza's chest tightened. That's cruel. It was honest. Or she believed it was. He turned the book over in his hands without looking at it. "The irony is that I felt everything for her. Every foolish, consuming, terrifying thing a man can feel. I simply couldn't show it the way she wanted. And when she threw that in my face publicly, I decided she was right. If controlling my emotions made me a statue, then I would be the finest statue ever carved. No one would ever see me vulnerable again." It was the most he'd said to her at once, the most personal thing he'd revealed. Carenza sensed that speaking it aloud cost him something. "That sounds exhausting," she said quietly. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "It is." She rose from the desk, moving toward him carefully, as one might approach a wounded creature. "I know something about performance, about wearing masks so long you forget you have a face underneath. My family spent 3 years pretending we weren't destroyed, pretending we had hope, pretending we didn't cry ourselves to sleep, wondering how we'd survive another month. And now I'm here, in a Duke's library, wearing borrowed clothes and planning a fake courtship that might restore everything we lost." She stopped a few feet from him, close enough to see the individual threads of silver in his cravat. "Your grandmother thinks I'm dangerous, that I might make you feel things. She doesn't realize that I'm just as dangerous to myself." His eyes searched her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. "What do you mean?" "I mean that you're not the only one who's afraid of wanting things." The words came out before she could stop them. "For 3 years, I've wanted nothing except survival. Kept my expectations small. Didn't let myself dream because dreams hurt when they shatter. And now you're offering me everything I've lost, and I'm terrified to reach for it. Because you think it will be snatched away. Because it always is. Because people like me don't get happy endings. We get temporary reprieves followed by worse disasters." Caius set the book down on a nearby table. His hand rose, then stopped, as if he'd thought better of touching her. What if this time were different? Is that a promise? It's a possibility. His voice was low, uncertain, in a way that seemed foreign to his nature. "I don't know how to promise things anymore. I don't know how to offer more than exactly what was agreed upon. But I know that when you challenged me at that ball, I felt more awake than I have in years. And I know that terrifies me just as much as it terrifies you." The lamp flickered, casting shadows across his face. In this light, he looked younger, less like a statue, more like a man who had been hurt badly and was only beginning to consider the possibility of healing. "We're quite a pair," Carenza said softly. "Two people too afraid to want anything, pretending to want each other. Perhaps that's why it might work. Neither of us is expecting a fairy tale. No, just survival." "Just survival," he agreed. But his eyes held hers for a moment longer than necessary, and she saw something there that looked almost like hope. The next morning, a small package appeared outside her door. Inside was a volume of Catullus, the same poem she'd been reading, in an edition far finer than any she'd ever owned. The note inside was brief. "For your collection. Whatever happens, this is yours to keep." C. Carenza pressed the book to her chest and allowed herself, for just one moment, to want. The Pemberton Ball was the event of the season, and everyone who mattered knew it. 300 guests in the grandest ballroom in London, chandeliers dripping crystal fire, an orchestra imported from Vienna, and enough gossip to fuel drawing-room conversations for months. Carenza stood at the top of the entrance staircase, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. The gown was sapphire silk, commissioned specifically for tonight by Madame Fontaine, the most exclusive modiste in London. It hugged her figure before flowing into a cascade of fabric that whispered with every step. Diamonds borrowed from the Aldworth collection sparkled at her throat and ears. Her hair was swept up in an elaborate arrangement that had taken Una 2 hours to perfect. She looked, for the first time in her life, like she belonged among these glittering people. She felt like a fraud. "Stop fidgeting." Tanith appeared at her elbow, resplendent in rose pink. "You look magnificent. Caius is going to forget how to breathe. Caius barely remembers how to smile. I doubt my appearance will affect his respiratory function." "You underestimate yourself." Tanith squeezed her arm. "And you underestimate him. He's been pacing the library for an hour. I've never seen him nervous before a ball." Before Carenza could respond, the Duke himself appeared. He wore black evening clothes that somehow made him look both more severe and more handsome than she'd ever seen him. His eyes found hers immediately, and something stirred in their blue depths. "Miss Fairclough." His voice was formal, but his gaze lingered on the curve of her neck, the diamonds at her throat. "You look acceptable?" she offered, echoing his words from weeks ago. The ghost of a smile crossed his features. "I was going to say extraordinary, but acceptable works too." Tanith made a delighted sound and vanished into the crowd with suspicious speed, leaving them alone at the edge of the ballroom. "Everyone is watching," Carenza murmured. "Let them." Caius offered his arm. "That's the point, isn't it? The Duke of Aldworth, publicly besotted with the Fairclough girl. We might as well give them something to remember." They descended into the ballroom together, and the whispers began immediately. Carenza caught fragments as they moved through the crowd. Stunning transformation. Can you believe it? The disgraced scholar's daughter. He looks at her like she's made of starlight. That last one made her stumble slightly. Caius's hand covered hers on his arm, steadying her. "Courage," he said quietly. "You've faced worse than ballroom gossip." "Have I?" "You faced me, at Lady Ashford's, when you thought I was just another arrogant lord trying to throw you out. You were an arrogant lord trying to throw me out." "True. But you didn't know I was a duke. You challenged me without knowing my rank. That takes either tremendous courage or tremendous foolishness." "Can't it be both?" He laughed. Actually laughed. A sound that turned heads throughout the ballroom. Carenza realized with a start that she'd never heard him laugh before. Not really. Not like this. Warm and unguarded and genuine. Several matrons lowered their fans to stare. A cluster of young ladies whispered behind gloved hands. Even the dowager, stationed near the refreshment table like a general surveying her troops, seemed momentarily surprised. "You should do that more often," Carenza said. "Do what?" "Laugh. It transforms your entire face." Something flickered in his expression, too quick to name. "I haven't had much reason to laugh lately. And now I have you. God help us both." The orchestra began a waltz. Without asking, Caius led her onto the floor. "We didn't discuss dancing," she protested weakly. "We're discussing it now." His hand found her waist, and the warmth of it spread through her like brandy. "I'll lead. You follow. Try not to look like you're being tortured." "I'm not." "You're holding your breath again." She released it deliberately, forcing her shoulders to relax. They began to move, and somehow her body remembered what to do. Turn, sweep, and glide. His hand pressed firmly against her back, guiding her through the steps, with an ease that suggested years of practice. "You're good at this," she admitted. "I'm good at most things that require control and precision. Modest, too. Modesty is for people who have something to prove." But his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners. "My mother insisted on dancing lessons from the age of 6. She said a gentleman who couldn't waltz was no gentleman at all." "She sounds formidable." She was. Something softened in his expression. "She died when I was 12. Fever took her in 3 days. My father never recovered." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. She lived fully while she was here. That's more than most people manage." The waltz swept them across the floor, past watching eyes and whispering mouths. Carenza caught glimpses of the dowager, watching with narrow assessment, of Tanith, beaming with barely concealed delight, of other couples who parted to make way for them, as if recognizing royalty in their midst. She found herself studying him as they moved together, cataloging the small details she'd missed before, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes that deepened when he smiled, the way his hand guided her with firm certainty, the scent of him, sandalwood, and something darker, something uniquely his. "You're staring," he observed. "I'm observing. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Staring is rude. Observing is educational." His lips twitched. "And what have you learned from your observations?" "That you're more comfortable leading than following. That you've done this 1,000 times, but tonight feels different to you. That you're watching the room even while you're dancing with me, tracking who's talking to whom, who's watching us, who might be a threat." His hand tightened almost imperceptibly at her waist. "You see a great deal. I learned to watch people when I couldn't participate. 3 years of being excluded from society teaches you to read rooms quickly. What else do you see?" She considered for a moment, letting the music carry them through another turn. "You're enjoying yourself. Not just performing enjoyment, actually experiencing it. That surprises you." He was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was lower, meant only for her. "You surprise me. Constantly. I'm not accustomed to being surprised." Before she could respond, she saw Lady Venetia. Lady Venetia Harcourt stood at the edge of the ballroom like a golden statue of vengeance. Blonde hair piled in elaborate curls, a gown of cream silk that probably cost more than Carenza's family's entire annual income, and eyes that burned with barely suppressed fury. "She's watching us," Carenza murmured. "I know. She looks like she wants to murder me. She'll have to get in line." Caius turned her smoothly, blocking Venetia from view. "My grandmother probably wants first attempt. Your grandmother gave me a lecture about not falling in love with you. Did you take notes?" "I'm considering tattooing them on my arm." Another laugh, softer this time. "You're funnier than I expected." "You expected me to be dull?" "I expected you to be intimidated. Most people are. Most people haven't spent 3 years being spat on by society. After that, one more disapproving aristocrat is hardly terrifying. The waltz ended. They stood facing each other, slightly breathless, while the ballroom erupted in applause that seemed directed at them. "Walk with me," Caius said. "There's a terrace through those doors. We can escape for a moment." They slipped through the French doors into cool night air. The terrace overlooked gardens lit by paper lanterns, a fairy landscape of light and shadow. Other couples strolled the paths below, their laughter drifting upward like music. "You survived," Caius observed. "The night isn't over yet. The worst part is, you've been seen. You've been accepted, or at least tolerated. Tomorrow, the invitations will arrive. The Ashford picnic, Lady Chester's garden party, the Whitmore musical. More performances. Yes." He leaned against the balustrade, looking out over the gardens. "Does that bother you?" "Everything about this bothers me." Carenza moved to stand beside him. "But not in the way you might think." "How then?" She considered the question carefully. Below them, a couple disappeared into the shadow of a hedge, their laughter fading to murmurs. "I always thought I knew who I was, the scholar's daughter, the disgraced family's defender, the survivor." She traced patterns on the stone railing. "But here, in this world, I'm becoming someone else. Someone who wears diamonds and dances with dukes and makes society matrons whisper behind their fans. And I don't know if that person is real or just another mask. Maybe both." His voice was quiet. "Maybe we're all just collections of masks, and the only real question is which ones we choose to wear." "That's depressing." "It's honest." He turned to face her, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I've worn the Duke's mask for so long I barely remember what's underneath. But with you..." He stopped. The silence stretched between them, charged with something neither of them had named. "With me?" she prompted. "With you, I find myself wanting to take it off. That terrifies me." Before Carenza could respond, a voice cut through the darkness like shattered glass. How touching. Lady Venetia emerged from the ballroom doors, her smile as cutting as a blade. Behind her came 2 other women, blonde and beautiful and cruel-eyed. The Duke of Aldworth, confessing his feelings to a nobody on a terrace. Venetia's laugh was musical and vicious. "What would your grandmother say?" "My grandmother would say that interrupting private conversations is vulgar." Caius's voice could have frozen fire. "Which it is." "Private?" Venetia's eyebrow arched. "Nothing is private at a ball, Your Grace. Everyone saw you dancing with her. Everyone heard you laughing." She pronounced the word like an accusation. The Duke of Aldworth, who hasn't laughed in 3 years, suddenly enchanted by the daughter of a disgraced fraud. "My father was innocent," Carenza said evenly. "Was he? Or did your new protector simply decide to rewrite history?" Venetia stepped closer, her perfume cloying and aggressive. "I've known Caius since we were children. I know what he's capable of. Falsifying evidence to serve his purposes would be nothing to him." The accusation landed like a blow. Carenza looked at Caius, searching for denial, but his face had gone carefully blank. "Is that true?" she asked. "Of course it's true," Venetia answered before he could. "He didn't investigate your father's case. He manufactured a convenient narrative. And you believed him because you were desperate." "That's enough." Caius's voice was ice. "Leave, Venetia. Now. Or what? You'll have me thrown out? That would be quite the scandal." She smiled triumphantly. "Face it, Caius. This little charade of yours is pathetic. Everyone knows you're using her to avoid your grandmother's expectations. Everyone knows she's using you to escape poverty. The only people who don't seem to realize how transparent you both are you." She swept back into the ballroom, her companions trailing like satellites around a malevolent star. Carenza's hands were trembling. She pressed them flat against the balustrade, trying to steady herself. "Is it true?" she asked again. "Did you manufacture the evidence?" "No." The word came out harsh, immediate. "I investigated. Properly. My aunt asked me to look into your father's case months ago, as a favor to her late husband's memory. The evidence against your father was fabricated by his colleague, a man named Ashworth, who was jealous of his work. I found the original documents, the testimonies Ashworth suppressed. Everything I told you is real." "Then why didn't you deny it when she accused you?" "Because denial makes accusations seem credible. Because I refuse to defend myself to Venetia Harcourt. Because—" He stopped, his jaw tightening. "Because for a moment I saw doubt in your eyes, and it made me realize how fragile this all is." The confession landed between them like a wound. "I do doubt," Carenza admitted. "Not you specifically. Everything. 3 years of learning that hope is dangerous taught me to question every gift. But that's my damage, not your fault. We're both damaged." He turned to face her fully, and in the lamplight, his defenses seemed thinner than she'd ever seen them. "I don't know how to do this, Carenza. Any of this. Pretending is supposed to be simple. Performance is supposed to be safe. But nothing about this feels like pretending anymore." Her breath caught at the sound of her name. He'd never used it before. Always Miss Fairclough, proper and distant. "Caius, don't." He held up a hand. "Don't say anything yet. I need to think. We both need to think." He escorted her back to the ballroom, his hand on her back barely touching, as if he was afraid of what contact might mean. They rejoined Tanith, danced with other partners, performed their roles with mechanical precision. But something had cracked open between them, and neither of them knew how to close it again. The days that followed were a strange kind of torture. They attended events together, performed their courtship with practiced ease, smiled for the watching crowds. But every private moment was charged with unspoken words, with glances that lingered too long, with accidental touches that sent electricity through Carenza's spine. The tension grew unbearable. Every conversation felt weighted with subtext, every silence stretched too long. Carenza found herself watching him constantly, cataloging the small tells she'd learned to read. The slight tightening around his eyes when he was tired, the way his fingers tapped against his thigh when he was thinking, the almost imperceptible softening of his expression when he thought no one was looking. She was falling. She knew it with the certainty of someone watching a cliff crumble beneath their feet. And she didn't know how to stop. She tried to remind herself of all the reasons this was foolish. He was a duke. She was nobody. This was an arrangement, a transaction, a carefully choreographed performance. Whatever she felt, whatever she thought she saw in his eyes, was part of the act. Except, it didn't feel like acting anymore. It felt terrifyingly real. She caught herself looking for him in crowds, listening for his footsteps in the hallway, treasuring the rare moments when his careful composure cracked and the man underneath showed through. She memorized the way he stirred his tea, the books he pulled from the library shelves, the exact cadence of his voice when he was tired versus when he was merely pretending to be bored. This was dangerous. This was exactly what the Dowager had warned her about, and she couldn't seem to stop. The night before the Whitmore musical, she found him in the library again. He was standing by the window, staring out at the moonlit garden, a glass of brandy untouched in his hand. He didn't turn when she entered, but his shoulders tensed slightly. "You should be sleeping," he said. "So should you." "I don't sleep much anymore. Haven't for years." She moved closer, drawn by something she couldn't name. "What keeps you awake?" "Memories, calculations, the endless machinery of running a dukedom." He finally turned, and his eyes met hers with devastating directness. You. The word hung in the air between them. Me. You've invaded my thoughts completely. I find myself wondering what you're doing at every moment, whether you're comfortable in your rooms, whether you're happy, whether you regret this arrangement as much as you should. I don't regret it. You should. I've dragged you into my world, used you as a shield against my grandmother, and exposed you to people like Venetia who will tear you apart given the chance. He set his brandy down with a controlled click. And the worst part is, I can't bring myself to be sorry. Because having you here, in my house, in my life, it's the first thing that's felt real in 3 years. Carenza's heart pounded against her ribs. This was dangerous. This was exactly what the Dowager had warned her about. But she couldn't make herself step back. What are you saying? I'm saying that I don't know how to pretend anymore. He closed the distance between them in 2 steps, his hand rising to cup her face. His palm was warm against her cheek, his fingers trembling almost imperceptibly. I'm saying that when I look at you, I don't see a convenient arrangement or a social stratagem. I see you, Carenza Fairclough, who challenged a duke to his face and made him remember what it felt like to be alive. Caius, tell me to stop. His thumb traced her cheekbone, impossibly gentle. Tell me this is madness that we agreed on terms, that I'm breaking every rule we established. Tell me, and I'll walk away. She should tell him. Every rational part of her mind screamed that this was exactly how people got hurt, how dreams shattered, how survivors became victims again. She thought of her father, who had trusted the wrong person and paid with everything. She thought of her mother, who had loved deeply and was still paying the price of that love. She thought of every warning the Dowager had given, every doubt Venetia had planted. But her mouth formed different words entirely. Don't walk away. He kissed her. It wasn't tentative or questioning. It was consuming, desperate, the release of weeks of tension and denial. His hands tangled in her hair, pins scattering across the carpet. Her fingers gripped his lapels, pulling him closer until no space remained between them. The taste of brandy and something darker, something that was purely him, flooded her senses. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. This changes everything, he said. I know. My grandmother will be furious. I know. Venetia will make your life a misery. She already does. Carenza pulled back enough to meet his eyes. But you're worth it. God help me. You're worth all of it. He kissed her again, softer this time, a promise rather than a declaration. His hand settled at her waist, holding her like something precious. I don't deserve you, he murmured against her lips. Probably not. But you have me anyway. They stood in the moonlit library, wrapped around each other, and for one perfect moment, nothing else mattered. The gossip of society, the machinations of his grandmother, and the venom of Lady Venetia, all of it faded into insignificance against the simple reality of this. Of them. Of the impossible thing growing between 2 people who had sworn never to want anything again. Then the door crashed open. How touching. The Dowager's voice was arctic, and how profoundly disappointing. The next morning destroyed everything. Carenza woke to chaos, raised voices echoing through the hallway, servants moving with barely controlled panic, Tanith appearing at her door with tears streaming down her face. You have to come, she gasped. Grandmother is... She's... What happened? She knows. About last night. About everything. One of the servants saw you in the library, and... The rest was lost as Carenza threw on a dressing gown and followed Tanith to the morning room where catastrophe waited. The Dowager stood by the fireplace, her face carved from stone. Caius stood opposite her, still in last night's clothes, looking like he hadn't slept at all. Between them, like a gleaming snake, sat Lady Venetia, dressed in impeccable mourning clothes, with a smile of pure triumph. Ah. The dowager's gaze fixed on Carenza. The architect of this disaster arrives. "Grandmother," Caius began. "Silence." The word cracked through the room like a whip. "I have tolerated this farce long enough. You brought this girl into my home, paraded her before society, and now I discover you've been conducting a liaison under my very roof." "Nothing improper occurred," Carenza said, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "We kissed. Nothing more." "Nothing more?" The dowager laughed bitterly. "You kissed the Duke of Aldworth, a man who is expected to marry Lady Venetia Harcourt, and you call it nothing more." "I am not expected to marry anyone," Caius said flatly. "I never agreed to any understanding with Lady Venetia. You will agree now." The dowager pulled a document from her pocket. "I have been patient, Caius. I have allowed you to grieve, to retreat, to avoid your responsibilities. But this ends now. You will marry Lady Venetia before the season ends, or I will disinherit you entirely. Not just my personal fortune. Everything I control." The color drained from Caius's face. "You can't. I can, and I will. My solicitors have confirmed it." The dowager's voice held no mercy. "The ducal estate is entailed, but my fortune, my properties, my connections, all of it goes to Declan unless you do as I say. This is blackmail. This is family duty, something you seem to have forgotten." The dowager turned her icy gaze on Carenza. "As for you, Miss Fairclough, you will leave this house within the hour. Your services as a distraction are no longer required." Carenza felt the floor tilt beneath her. "The evidence about my father will be released regardless. I keep my promises, even when my grandson breaks his." The dowager's lip curled slightly. "You'll have your father's reputation back, but you will never see my grandson again." "Grandmother, you cannot dictate whom I see." "Watch me!" The dowager swept toward the door. "Lady Venetia, I believe you have arrangements to discuss with my grandson. Miss Fairclough, my housekeeper will assist with your departure." She vanished, leaving devastation in her wake. Venetia rose, smoothing her skirts with satisfaction. "I'll give you a moment to say goodbye. It's the least I can do for a vanquished rival." Her smile was poison. "Don't worry, Miss Fairclough. I'll take excellent care of him." She left, and suddenly Carenza and Caius were alone with the wreckage of everything they'd built. "I won't do it." Caius's voice was raw. "I won't marry her. You have to. Your grandmother can disinherit me, can take everything. I don't care." He crossed to her, gripping her hands. "Stay. Fight this with me. We'll find another way." "There is no other way." Tears burned Carenza's eyes, but she forced them back. "Your grandmother controls your fortune, your connections, and your place in society. Without her support, you lose everything. And I won't be the reason for that." "You're not a reason. You're the only thing that matters." "No." She pulled her hands free, stepping back. "No, Caius. We agreed this was temporary. We agreed. Damn what we agreed." His voice cracked. "Everything changed. You know it did. Last night was a mistake." The lie tasted like ash. A moment of weakness. It didn't mean anything. His expression shattered. Actually shattered, revealing devastation beneath. "You don't mean that." "I have to mean it." Carenza moved toward the door, every step in agony. "This was always going to end. Your grandmother just accelerated the timeline." "Carenza, don't." She paused at the threshold, not looking back. "Don't make this harder than it already is. Marry Venetia. Secure your fortune. Live your life. What about you?" "I'll survive. I always do." She fled before he could see her cry. The walk back to her room felt endless. Every corridor reminded her of something. The gallery where Tanith had first explained the scheme. The morning room where the dowager had issued her warning. The library where everything had changed. She had been happy here. Terrifyingly, wonderfully happy. And now she had to pretend that happiness meant nothing. Una helped her pack in silence. The beautiful dresses, the diamonds, the borrowed life, all of it stayed behind. Carenza left with only what she'd brought: her worn carpet bag, her mended dress, and the catullus that Caius had given her. She paused at the door of the blue suite, looking back one last time at the room that had briefly been hers. The bed where she'd dreamed of possibilities. The window where she'd watched the sunrise. The desk where she'd written letters home, describing a life she couldn't quite believe was real. It had never been real. She saw that now. It had always been borrowed, just like everything else in her life since her father's fall. The carriage ride home was a blur of tears and recrimination. She had known. From the very beginning, she had known this would end badly. Had warned herself, built defenses, tried to protect her foolish heart. And still she had fallen. Still she had let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this time would be different. The cramped lodgings looked even smaller after Aldworth House. Her mother's face, lined with worry, broke into relief when she saw Carenza at the door. "My darling, what happened? We received a letter saying you were returning. But it's over." Carenza set down her bag. The arrangement. Everything. It's over. "Oh, sweetheart, don't." She held up a hand. "Don't comfort me. I can't bear it right now." She retreated to her tiny room and did not emerge for 3 days. On the 4th day, Merrick burst through her door. "You have a visitor. Send them away." "I tried. She won't leave." He was grinning, which seemed inappropriate given Carenza's devastation. "She says she's Lady Tanith Blackwell, and she's brought what appears to be half a modiste's shop in her carriage." Carenza sat up slowly. "Tanith? Come downstairs. You need to hear what she has to say." She found Tanith in their cramped parlor, looking utterly out of place in her elegant dress amid their worn furniture. But her smile was warm, and her eyes held something that looked like hope. "You look terrible," Tanith said. "Thank you. I feel worse." "Good. That means you care." Tanith grabbed her hand, squeezing tightly. "Listen to me carefully. Caius refused." "Refused what?" "Everything. Grandmother's ultimatum, Lady Venetia, the marriage, all of it." Tanith's eyes sparkled with unshed tears. "He told Grandmother that he would rather lose every penny than marry a woman he didn't love. He told Venetia that he wouldn't marry her if she were the last woman in England. He told the entire ton, at the Whitmore musical last night, that he had been a fool to let the woman he loved walk away." Carenza's heart stopped. "He said that? Publicly?" "Publicly. Loudly, and with quite a lot of champagne involved." Tanith laughed. It was glorious. Venetia left in tears. Grandmother had to be revived with smelling salts. And Caius stormed out declaring he was going to find you and beg your forgiveness on his knees if necessary. "Then why isn't he here?" "Because I got here first. Someone had to warn you." Tanith pressed a card into her hand. "He's at the old church, St. Crispin's. He said you'd know why." Carenza didn't know why, but she found herself running anyway, through narrow streets and crowded markets, her worn shoes slapping against cobblestones. She arrived at St. Crispin's breathless and disheveled, her hair escaping its pins, her dress hopelessly wrinkled. Caius waited on the church steps. He looked as wrecked as she felt, unshaven, his clothes rumpled, shadows beneath his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. But when he saw her, his face transformed. "You came. Tanith said you were here. She said you refused your grandmother. She said, everything I refused for you. He descended the steps, stopping just before her. You told me this was temporary. You told me it didn't mean anything. You lied. I was trying to protect you. I don't want protection. I want you. He reached for her hands, holding them between his own. For 3 years, I've been dead inside, going through the motions, performing the role of Duke while feeling nothing at all. And then you appeared, all fire and defiance, and suddenly I remembered what it felt like to be alive. Caius, let me finish. His grip tightened. When you left, I thought I could go back to the way things were. I thought I could bury whatever I felt and return to being the statue everyone expected. But I couldn't. I can't. You've ruined me for emptiness, Carenza. I don't want to be safe anymore. I want to be with you. They stood on the steps of St. Crispin's, the old stone church casting long shadows in the late afternoon light. Around them, London continued its endless bustle, but they existed in a pocket of stillness, 2 people on the edge of everything. I love you, Carenza. Caius's voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. Not because you're convenient or strategic or anything my grandmother would approve of. I love you because you make me brave, because you challenge me and frustrate me and make me want to be better than I am. Your grandmother has agreed to reconsider her position. A hint of his old humor returned briefly. Tanith can be very persuasive when she wants to be. Apparently, she threatened to elope with a dancing master if grandmother didn't relent. Despite everything, Carenza laughed. She didn't. She absolutely did. Grandmother was horrified. His expression grew serious again. We have her conditional support. It's not approval, not yet, but it's a start. And Venetia? Gone. Fled to the country to recover from her humiliation. His jaw tightened. She won't trouble you again. I made certain of that. Carenza looked at him, this impossible man who had humiliated her publicly, and then chosen her more publicly still. The man who had built barriers around his heart for 3 years and was now standing before her, offering to tear them down. You gave up everything for me, she said. I gave up nothing that mattered. He stepped closer, his hands reaching for hers. Money, properties, social position. What are any of those compared to this? Compared to feeling alive again? But your grandmother's fortune will remain in the family regardless. Tanith convinced her that disinheriting me would only hurt the Blackwell name. He squeezed her hands. The details don't matter, Carenza. What matters is that I choose you. Not because I have to. Not because it serves some strategy. Because you're the only person I want. The only person I've wanted in 3 years. The only person who makes me feel like myself instead of a performance. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she didn't try to stop them. I'm scared, she admitted. I've spent so long expecting disaster that I don't know how to accept happiness. Neither do I. He lifted one hand to cup her face, wiping away tears with his thumb. But I'm tired of being scared. I'm tired of protecting myself from things that might hurt. I'd rather risk everything with you than spend another day being safe and empty. That's a significant risk. You're worth it. He pulled her closer, his forehead resting against hers. Say you'll stay. Say this is real. Say I haven't destroyed the only good thing to happen to me in years. Carenza thought of her mother's words. Running doesn't make the wanting go away. She thought of all the years ahead, wondering what if. She thought of Caius's kiss, his laughter, the way he looked at her like she was extraordinary. It's real, she whispered. God help me. It's real. Then marry me. The words hung between them like a promise, like a prayer, like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking. What? Marry me. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes, his gaze fierce and certain. Not because of arrangements or schemes or grandmother's ultimatums, not because society expects it, or because it would be advantageous. Marry me because I love you, and you love me, and that's the only thing that matters. Marry me because I can't imagine facing another day without knowing you'll be there. Marry me because you make me better, braver, more alive than I ever thought I could be. You're proposing on church steps after we both look like we haven't slept in days? I'm proposing wherever you are, because wherever you are is where I want to be. He smiled, and it transformed his entire face. Besides, St. Crispin's seemed appropriate, the patron saint of impossible causes. Is that what I am? An impossible cause? No. He kissed her forehead, her cheeks, and the corner of her mouth. You're the most possible thing that's ever happened to me, the most real, the most worth fighting for. Carenza looked at him, this man who had started as an adversary and become something she couldn't live without. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the social barriers, the family complications, the years of difficulty that surely lay ahead. Then she thought of all the reasons to say yes, his hand in hers, his laugh in her ears, the way he looked at her like she was the only thing worth seeing. Yes, she said, 1,000 times, yes. He kissed her on the steps of St. Crispin's, in full view of passers-by who would certainly gossip, and Carenza Fairclough didn't care at all. When they finally broke apart, she was laughing and crying simultaneously. We should go back, she said. Tell your grandmother. Face whatever comes next. Together. Together. They walked back to Aldworth House hand in hand, and when they arrived, even the dowager couldn't entirely hide the softening in her expression. I see you've made your choice, she said to Caius. I have. And you? The dowager turned to Carenza. Do you understand what you're choosing? The scrutiny, the judgment, the endless work of proving yourself worthy? Carenza met her gaze directly. I've spent 3 years proving myself worthy of survival, Your Grace. I think I can manage proving myself worthy of happiness. A long silence. Then, unexpectedly, the dowager smiled. Perhaps, she said slowly. You'll do after all. It wasn't approval. Not quite. But it was a beginning. The Ashford Midsummer Ball was the setting, perfectly symmetrical with where everything began. Lady Ashford had insisted on hosting what she called the formal announcement, though by now all of London knew. The Duke of Aldworth had chosen the disgraced scholar's daughter. He had defied his grandmother, rejected the perfect Lady Venetia, and declared his love before half the ton. It was the scandal of the decade. It was also, as Lady Ashford gleefully noted, the romance of the century. Carenza stood at the top of the same staircase where she had first entered this world, wearing the same sapphire silk that had marked her transformation. But everything else was different. Caius stood beside her, his hand warm in hers, his eyes holding nothing but joy. Ready? He murmured. No. Perfect. Neither am I. They descended together, and the ballroom erupted. 300 guests turned to watch them, the same number who had witnessed her humiliation months ago. The whispers began immediately, but this time they carried a different tone, romantic, triumphant, admiring. The dowager stood near the refreshment table, her expression complex. She had not fully accepted the match, but she had stopped fighting it. Tanith had proven more persuasive than anyone expected, and the evidence clearing Professor Fairclough's name had been published in 3 major papers. The Fairclough reputation, once destroyed, was slowly being rebuilt. Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Ashford's voice cut through the murmurs. I am delighted, to present my nephew, His Grace the Duke of Aldworth, and his betrothed, Miss Carenza Fairclough. Betrothed. The word still felt unreal. Caius had proposed properly a second time 3 days ago, in the library at Aldworth House, surrounded by books and memories. He had gotten down on one knee with a ring that had belonged to his mother, and Carenza had said yes again, just as certainly as the first time. They rejected her publicly, Lady Ashford continued, her voice carrying across the hushed ballroom. Society scorned her, dismissed her, and treated her family as pariahs for crimes they didn't commit. But my nephew saw what the rest of us were too blind to see. He saw her courage, her integrity, her worth, and he chose her. Carenza's throat tightened. Beside her, Caius squeezed her hand. He chose her in front of everyone, Lady Ashford finished, and I, for one, could not be more proud. The applause began slowly, building to a thunderous crescendo. Carenza saw her mother weeping in the crowd, Merrick grinning like a fool beside her. She saw Tanith bouncing with excitement, the dowager inclining her head in grudging acknowledgement. She saw 300 faces that had once condemned her, now celebrating her triumph. Caius led her onto the floor as the orchestra struck up a waltz. "You're crying," he observed. "I'm happy." "Then cry as much as you like." He pulled her close, closer than was strictly proper. "I've discovered I rather enjoy making you happy." They danced, and the ballroom spun around them in a blur of light and music. Other couples joined, but Carenza barely noticed. She was aware only of Caius, of the warmth of his hand, the certainty of his love, the impossible reality that this was her life now. When the waltz ended, he didn't release her. Instead, in full view of everyone, he cupped her face and kissed her with deliberate tenderness. The gasps gave way to delighted laughter, to more applause, to the satisfied sighs of romantics who had been hoping for exactly this. "Was that necessary?" Carenza asked, breathless. "Absolutely essential." His eyes sparkled with mischief. "I wanted there to be no doubt. About you, about us, about what you mean to me. And what do I mean to you? Everything." The word was simple and devastating. "You mean everything, Carenza, and I intend to spend the rest of my life proving it." 6 months later, Carenza stood in the library at Aldworth House, now officially hers. She was arranging her father's books on a new shelf that Caius had commissioned specifically for them. The collection had been recovered from storage, carefully restored, and placed here where they belonged. She came across a letter tucked into one of the volumes, written in her father's careful hand, addressed to her, but never sent. "My dearest Carenza, if you're reading this, I am gone, and I am sorry. Sorry for the disgrace I brought upon our family. Sorry for the burden I left you to carry. But I want you to know that none of it was your fault. The world can be cruel to those who dare to seek truth. It can punish honesty and reward deception. But that doesn't mean honesty isn't worth pursuing. Find someone who sees your value, my darling girl. Someone who loves your courage and your fire. Someone who chooses you not despite the difficulties, but because of them. You deserve to be chosen, Carenza. You deserve to be loved. Be brave, my darling. Be happy. Your loving father." Tears streamed down her face. She was still standing there, clutching the letter, when Caius found her. "What's wrong?" He crossed to her immediately, concern flooding his features. "Carenza, what happened?" "My father." She handed him the letter, watching his expression as he read. "He wrote this before he died. He wanted me to be brave, to be happy, to find someone who chose me." Caius set the letter down gently. He pulled her into his arms, holding her close while she cried. "He would have approved," he said quietly, "of us, of this. How do you know? Because he loved you, and because I choose you every single day. Not despite the difficulties, just like he said. Because of them. Carenza pulled back, looking up at the man who had changed everything. The Duke who had rejected her publicly, and then chosen her more publicly still. The broken man who had learned to feel again, her husband. I love you, she said. I know. He kissed her forehead. I love you too. Desperately. Completely. Forever. Outside the library windows, London continued its endless dance of society and scandal. But inside, in their sanctuary of books and memories, the Duke of Aldworth and his impossible Duchess were perfectly, completely home. In the years that followed, they built a life together that defied every expectation. Carenza established a foundation in her father's name, providing scholarships to young scholars from modest backgrounds. The Dowager eventually admitted, in her own grudging way, that perhaps love matches weren't entirely foolish. Tanith married a viscount who adored her, and Merrick found steady employment managing one of the Aldworth estates, his scheming days finally behind him. Their first child, a daughter with her father's blue eyes and her mother's stubborn chin, arrived on a winter morning when snow blanketed the gardens. Caius held her with the reverent wonder of a man who had finally learned that the world contained more than duty and obligation. She's perfect, he whispered. She's loud, Carenza countered, though she was smiling through tears, just like her mother. Exactly like her mother. Thank God. They attended the Ashford Ball every year, on the anniversary of everything changing. They descended the same staircase, danced the same first waltz, and scandalized society by kissing in public, like newlyweds, even after years of marriage. And every year, without fail, someone would retell the story. They rejected her publicly, the story would go. Society scorned her, dismissed her, and treated her like nothing. Her father had been disgraced, her family ruined, her future destroyed. She had nothing but borrowed dresses and borrowed hope. They whispered about her behind their fans and laughed at her presumption. But then the Duke chose her, another voice would add, in front of everyone. He saw what no one else could see. He challenged society itself for her. He gave up everything that was supposed to matter because she mattered more. He chose her. Carenza would smile when she heard it, her hand finding Caius's across the table or the ballroom or wherever they happened to be when the tale was told again. I did, he would say quietly, for her ears alone. And I would do it again. Every time, in every life, in every world where we might exist. Forever. And she would always believe him, completely, because she knew it was true. Because every day, in small ways and large, he continued to choose her, not the scholar's daughter or the Duchess or any of the roles she played. Her, Carenza, the woman who had challenged him when she had nothing to lose, and who had stayed when she had everything to gain. Some endings weren't really endings at all. They were beginnings, disguised as conclusions. Promises made not at the altar, but in every moment after, in every choice to stay, to fight, and to love despite the fear. They were proof that the world could surprise you, that hope could be rewarded, that love could triumph over every obstacle society placed in its path. This was theirs, and it was only the beginning. Thank you for being here. You are the reason these stories exist, because you believe in love that chooses courage over convenience, in characters who fight for happiness despite the odds, in endings that feel earned and true. Your presence makes this space warm and welcoming, and I'm grateful for every moment you spend with these characters. Do you have a favorite line or scene? Your engagement helps me understand what moves you, what keeps you listening, and what kinds of stories to create next. Consider subscribing if you'd like more romances with emotional depth and genuine character growth. Thank you for being here. You make this community what it is.